leaving the United States and banking outside the United States has likely saved me thousands of dollars per year. While obviously many people look to large American banks for financial information or updates on global affairs, I've looked elsewhere. I've looked in Armenia, Georgia, Poland, several jurisdictions that have high value, high touch point consulting, private banking, and options for building wealth and connections beyond just the quote-unquote normal services. And it's with that I become not only much more diversified in where I can hold my money, but also much more able to have high-quality services and touch-point contacts in Georgia, Poland, Armenia, Ukraine, you name it, as the banking relationships that these banks maintain are automatically given to people they consider worthy of which, obviously, being a private banking client becomes instant credibility in that. If you're looking for this sort of an in to high-level entrepreneurs, high-level business people, even potentially politicians or executives at the bank, I highly recommend looking at specific options for private banking. Now, while private banking is not perfect, it also has some of the same flaws that commercial banking does. I believe that maintaining a physical bank in the modern era is still necessary, and the reason why is not necessarily for compliance reasons. You can use a fintech, neobank, stuff like this to be compliant regardless. It's more so due to the inherent stability and also contacts that these banks provide. They've gone from providing solely banking services to being banking networks, which provides a high level of return on capital that isn't necessarily seen in the balance sheets. And they want you to make money. They want you to bank with them. And the reason why is they make money on your money. Any amounts of assets under management, they'll actually go out of their way to help you build, help you maintain, and help you grow, as they want their balance sheets to be padded by the wealthy, padded by loans. And it's with that you gain a unique, leverage opportunity in these private banking services to go into markets that otherwise wouldn't necessarily be on your to-do list. As I grow my businesses, which I own quite a few, I believe that it's imperative to build the networks that go alongside those businesses. And I think any self-respecting entrepreneur or even investor is doing themselves a disservice to just solely limit themselves to low quality, low touch point banking. And it's not that expensive. The most expensive private bank at Bank of Georgia is 800 lari per year. And what do you get with that? You get a private concierge, you get event bookings, you get access to lounges. All of this stuff in the US would cost thousands of dollars. Bank of Georgia is giving it to you for only $256 a year. And part of that is it's not as valuable in Georgia, of course. And of course you can outsource a concierge team to many people. However, making intentional and worthwhile decisions to pay for these things and truly gain the connections you need is, I feel, very worth the $256 price tag. I'll leave the current conversion rate up here. I know it's not exactly $256, but you get the idea. And this extends not only to the United States, but to Asia, to countries in Africa, to, obviously, like I'm using it, Europe, to South America, because these services are unique. They are value-driven because they need your capital. If you have $50,000 laying in an account, these banks don't see that as nothing. And in fact, they will fight for that $50,000 in a way American banks never would. For many banks, there's a spending requirement on top of a wealth requirement, on top of poor customer service, on top of insane fees. If you're looking to diversify out of higher fees, lower service quality, living your life without the stresses of when you call waiting on hold for 30 minutes, then I actually highly recommend getting a private bank, and it's a good peace of mind. Very worthwhile for anyone looking for that peace of mind and that understanding that you get through a private banker relationship. I'll give you some examples beyond just what I've already mentioned of high touch points, low cost private banking options. And if you need help with creating accounts in any of these banks, I highly recommend leaving a comment down below, and perhaps we can set up a one-on-one phone call just for you to go over your situation and your optimal bank. Obviously, I've already mentioned Bank of Georgia. There's also Ameriabank, which is owned by Bank of Georgia, which actually is a key distinction that I'd like to make. Being in an ecosystem is supremely advantageous to not just you, not just your clients, but to the bank itself, which means you'll get better rates, and the bank's clients, which again reflects well on you. And it's with that you are able to make high impact connections for a low cost. If you wanted to, you could only put in $80 per month for high touch point, personal concierge service, large banking relationships, increasing banking relationships. And as Bank of Georgia grows and offers more and more competitive services, you can then create more relationships around the globe. Right now, I'm hoping that Georgia buys up banks, Bank of Georgia rather, buys up banks in Uzbekistan, which would be very interesting to me as I'm looking at going to Uzbekistan and breaking into the market, which it becomes supremely easier if I am a private banking customer, of course, which I am. And exclusivity and relationship with the bank, that you become indispensable, so to speak, to how their operations and how their business model grows, and you become a huge part of their business model growth. And banks, despite the outward appearance, listen to their clients a lot more than you'd think. They truly believe in delivering high quality deliverables, as in these countries, there's high competition. There's competition amongst large banks and small banks, and especially foreign banks. So it creates downward pressure that they need to fight for your dollars, whereas an American bank wouldn't necessarily need to. Additionally, if you are looking at creating a multi-jurisdictional setup, having local bank accounts in countries where you're hiring employees makes payroll and paying taxes very much a lot easier, and you additionally have little compliance issues in terms of banking. Whereas with foreign banks, there's no guarantee of compliance being upheld. And that becomes problematic if you are looking at the long-term effects of these things, which, of course, we always recommend doing things legally, doing things ethically, and making the most out of your situation from a legal perspective as well. And it's with this compliance that governments like you, and especially in smaller places or in places where money actually means something, governments liking you is a very good thing. It's an advantageous thing to a level that isn't necessarily seen in places like the United States, like Germany, because to be quite frank with you, they're content not having your money. They're content with being stuck without capital, and they're seeing the ramifications of that only recently. And even then, the United States is not seeing the ramifications of it in the same way that Europe is, which is leading to a systemic issue of building systems that are essentially designed to fail. I don't know if you've realized this, but America is one of the highest rates of bank failures, not just in the region, but in the world. And you'd think a capital expenditure as large as the United States, how are banks failing? However, it's a failure not of the regulations, as American banking is some of the most regulated in the world. I'll put an article up so you can understand, for example, the anti-money laundering laws are, but the smaller bank you didn't think about probably is going to want your business in a way that the US never did and never will. And obviously there's a saying, money compounds over time, and that's true. However, it also causes arrogance, and that's exactly what's happening with the US. That's what's happening with larger states in the EU, like France and Germany, or the UK, which recently left the EU, which I'll give you a video on why the UK leaving the EU truly isn't a bad thing for globalization. I'll put that in the cards if I upload it. However, the main problem and the crux of the issue is that Americans have become too content with being the center of the world, and it's starting to now have competition. While I think that competition will invariably have impact on US-specific business, eventually, currently, is the best time for arbitraging it, as it is new. Laws are not changing as quickly as banks are innovating, and it leads to high amounts of growth in your health, wealth, and happiness. And here at Travel Report, we love to help you go where your money matters. And obviously, if the United States isn't going to take it, some other country probably will. And they'll probably be giving you an arm and a leg for it, which is a nice feeling. For sure, it's freeing, because traditional banking and traditional idealisms typically are restrictive to individuals, as they're the collectivization of capital. However, increasingly, with new innovations and new democratic processes, not necessarily in government, but in private businesses, these things are transcending governments, and you no longer have to vote physically. You can vote with your capital. And this is insanely important to realize, as voting with your feet and voting with your capital is far more impactful than voting at the voting booth. Now, if you're political, and I vote every time I can as well, that's perfectly and morally acceptable. However, I think with the increasing world order shift, we've seen that voting matters less and less in democracies, and voting with your feet instead works far better. Alright guys, I appreciate you watching that video. I truly would appreciate if you subscribed, liked, commented, left any suggestions down in the comments down below, made anything that you could improve this channel, as I am currently looking at doing so. Without further ado, I hope you have a wonderful day. This has been Traveling with Court, signing off.